How's it going, everyone? It's ZLR here, and today I'm doing my recap for week 6 of the NFL. Kind of a better week for me for my predictions, as I actually went 11-3 on them this week. I will tell you guys right now. I'm glad to be back up over 500, but I feel like it's just gonna be weird. But anyway, first, we had the Thursday night football game between the 49ers and the Seahawks, and both of them wearing throwback jerseys, which, oh boy, I love throwback jerseys. And 49ers getting the win 36-24, and pretty good game. I would say this is like the second week in a row that there's been a really good Thursday night game. And we had quite a lot of players rushing on the 49ers side. So let's get right into our little like stat recap here. Brock Purdy, 18 completions out of 28 attempts, 255 yards, 3 touchdowns. Crazy game. uh Isaac Guerrero, 10 carries for 99 yards. Jordan Mason, 9 carries for 73 yards. I think he's actually injured as well, which actually really sucks. Um, Brock Purdy, 4 carries, 19 yards. We had Patrick Taylor Jr. with 5 carries for 16 yards. Debo Samuel, 4 carries for 15 yards. And Kyle Juszczyk with 1 carry, 6 yards, and a touchdown. Pretty good there. Debo Samuel had 3 receptions, 102 yards, and a touchdown. George Kittle had 5 receptions, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Brandon Ayuk had 2 receptions for 37 yards. Jawan Jennings had 3 receptions for 27 yards. Patrick Taylor Jr. had 1 reception for 12 yards. Kyle Juszczyk had 3 receptions for 10 yards. And Jordan Mason had 1 reception for 9 yards. And for the Seahawks side of things, we had Geno Smith, 30 completions out of 52 attempts, 312 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. Kenneth Walker, 14 carries, 32 yards, 1 touchdown. Zach Charbonnet had 5 carries for 20 yards. And Geno Smith had 1 carry but didn't get anything out of it. Tyler Lockett had 4 receptions for 65 yards and a touchdown. Noah Fant had 6 receptions for 63 yards. Jackson Smith had 5 receptions for 53 yards. DK Metcalf had 3 receptions for 48 yards. Kenneth Walker had 8 receptions for 37 yards. Jake Bobo had 2 receptions for 18 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 1 reception for 15 yards. And AJ Barner had 1 reception for 13 yards. Then we had the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Bears playing out in London, with the Bears getting the win 35-16. We had Trevor Lawrence, 23 completions out of 35 attempts for 234 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. Mac Jones also completed a pass out of his 1 attempt for 6 yards. We also had Dearness Johnson with 6 carries for 28 yards. Tank Bigsby with 7 carries for 24 yards. We had Trevor Lawrence with 4 carries for 17 yards. And Travis Etienne Jr. had 3 carries but got -1 yard. Evan Ingram had 10 receptions, 102 yards. Gabe Davis had 5 receptions, 45 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I almost said a touchdown, but I meant 2 touchdowns. Christian Kirk had, 3 receptions for 39 yards. Brian Thomas Jr. had 3 receptions for 27 yards. Dearness Johnson had 2 receptions for 16 yards. We had Brenton Strange with 1 reception for 11 yards. And that's about it. We had Caleb Williams completing 23 out of 29 passes for 226 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a interception. DeAndre Swift, 17 carries and 91 yards and a touchdown. Caleb Williams had 4 carries for 56 yards. Roshan Johnson had 5 carries for 8 yards. And Tyson Bagent had 3 carries but got -3 yards from it. We had Cole Kmet, 5 receptions, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Keenan Allen with 5 receptions, 41 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rome Odunze with 2 receptions for 40 yards. DeAndre Swift with 4 receptions, 28 yards. Roshan Johnson with 2 receptions for 25 yards. DJ Moore with 4 receptions for 20 yards. We had Mercedes Lewis with 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Buccaneers and the Saints, with the Buccaneers winning it 51-27. We had a 50 burger as, oh boy. Buccaneers just had a pretty decent game. I mean, Baker Mayfield threw a few more interceptions than what I thought he would have, but a win's still a win. And still by that many points, too. Crazy shit. Baker Mayfield, 24 completions, 36 attempts, 325 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. We had Sean Tucker with 14 carries, 136 yards, and a touchdown. Bucky Irving had 14 carries, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Sterling Shepard had 4 carries for 31 yards, and Baker Mayfield had 3 carries for 29 yards. Chris Godwin, 11 receptions, 125 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Sean Tucker had 3 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. We had Ryan Miller with 1 reception for 39 yards. Mike Evans with 2 receptions for 34 yards. Bucky Irving with 2 receptions for 24 yards. Sterling Shepard with 3 receptions for 23 yards. We had Cade Otton. Holy shit. Devante Adams just got traded to the Jets. But Cade Otton, 2 receptions, 15 yards, and a touchdown. And Tristan Wirfs with 9 yards, but didn't have a reception. It was probably from a pitch or a hook and ladder. But holy crap. Holy crap, that was crazy. Alright, I am back after that whole situation. I had to make it short before I came back. Holy crap, dude. I would not have thought that it would have been as I was making this video. But you'll probably see the little tag right up here to see my video for it. But holy crap. Spencer Rattler, 22 completions out of 40 attempts, 243 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Alvin Kamara had 13 carries, 40 yards, and a touchdown. Spencer Rattler had 4 carries for 27 yards. We had Jamal Williams with 2 carries for 7 yards. Jordan Mims with 1 carry for 5 yards. And Rashid Shaheed with 1 carry for 2 yards. Foster Moranu with 2 receptions, 54 yards. We had Jawan Johnson with where are you? 3 receptions, 48 yards. Bub Means, 5 receptions, 45 yards, and a touchdown. We had Cedric Wilson Jr. with 2 receptions for 28 yards. Alvin Kamara with 5 receptions for 24 yards. We had Mason Tipton with 1 reception for 15 yards. We had Jordan Mims with 2 receptions for 13 yards. Rashid Shaheed with 1 reception for 11 yards. And Chris Olave with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Commanders and the Ravens, with the Ravens winning it 30-23. And another pretty decent game here. I mean, Jaden Daniels, 24 completions, 35 attempts, 269 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Pretty decent game from him. Also had 6 carries for 22 yards. Austin Eckler had 9 carries for 21 yards. Jeremy McNichols had 2 carries for 9 yards. And Scary Terry had 1 carry but didn't get anything out of it. We had Zach Ertz with 4 receptions for 68 yards. Noah Brown with 4 receptions, 58 yards. Scary Terry with 6 receptions, 53 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Austin Eckler with 4 receptions for 47 yards. Omalad Zacchaeus with 4 receptions, 27 yards. We had Daimi Brown with 1 reception for 11 yards. And Luke McCaffrey with 1 reception for 5 yards. For the Ravens side of things, we had Lamar Jackson, I almost just said carries. 20 completions out of 26 attempts, 323 yards, a touchdown, and the interception. We had Derrick Henry, 24 carries, 132 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Lamar Jackson had 11 carries and 40 yards. We had Justice Hill with 1 carry for 2 yards, as well as Zay Flowers. We also had Zay Flowers with 9 receptions for 132 yards. We had Rashad Bateman with 4 receptions for 71 yards. Mark Andrews with 3 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Finally did something. Isaiah Likely, 2 receptions for 27 yards. Nelson Aguilar with 1 reception for 25 yards. And Justice Hill with 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Packers and the Cardinals, with the Packers winning this one 34-13. We had Kyler Murray, 22 completions, 32 attempts, 214 yards, and a touchdown. We had Trey Benson with 5 carries for 26 yards. Amari Demercado with 4 carries for 25 yards. We had James Conner with 7 carries for 24 yards. And Kyler Murray with 7 carries for 14 yards. We had Trey McBride with 8 receptions, 96 yards. We had Amari Demercado with 5 receptions for 39 yards. Greg Dortch with 3 receptions for 36 yards. James Conner with 4 receptions for 22 yards. We also had Michael Wilson with 2 receptions, 21 yards, and a touchdown. And for the Packers side of things, we had Jordan Love, 22 completions out of 32 attempts, 258 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 8 interception. Josh Jacobs, 18 carries, 62 yards. Emmanuel Wilson with 7 carries for 54 yards. We had Bo Melton with 2 carries, 27 yards. Chris Brooks with 4 carries, 21 yards. Jordan Love had, 5 carries for 13 yards. Tucker Kraft had 1 carry for 2 yards. And Jaden Reed carried it once but didn't get anything out of it. Then we had, holy shit, that's a lot of receivers. Christian Watson, 3 receptions, 68 yards, and a touchdown. Romeo Doubs with 3 receptions, 49 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Then we had Ben Sims with 2 receptions, 38 yards. Jaden Reed had 6 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs had 3 receptions for 28 yards. Emmanuel Wilson had 1 reception for 19 yards. Tucker Kraft had 2 receptions for 13 yards. And Dontavian Wicks had 1 reception for 9 yards. Bo Melton had 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Colts and the Titans, with the Colts win at 20-17. We had Joe Flacco with 22 completions out of 38 attempts, 189 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. We had Tyler Goodson with 8 carries, 51 yards. Trey Sermon with 18 carries for 29 yards. Joe Flacco with 1 carry for 1 yard. And Josh Downs had 1 carry but didn't get anything out of it. Josh Downs also had 7 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Mo Alley Cox had 4 receptions for 41 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. had 3 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Andrew Ogletree had 2 receptions for 24 yards. Tyler Goodson had 4 receptions for 14 yards. Adonai Mitchell had 2 receptions for 9 yards. And for the Titans, we have Will Levis, 16 carries, 27 yards, 16. Speaking too fast. 16 completions out of 27 attempts for 95 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Tony Pollard had 17 carries, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Tajay Spears had 6 carries, 27 yards. Will Levis had 3 carries for 15 yards. Calvin Ridley had 1 carry for 9 yards. And Julius Chestnut had 1 carry for 2 yards. DeAndre Hopkins had 4 receptions, 54 yards. Tyler Boyd had 3 receptions for 19 yards. We had Traylon Burks with 1 reception for 10 yards. We had Nick Westbrook with 1 reception for, I think it said 9 yards. Yeah, and a touchdown. Chig Okonkwo had 3 receptions for 6 yards. We have Josh Weil with 1 reception for 2 yards. And Tony Pollard had 3 receptions but got -5 yards from it. Then we had the Houston Texans go up against my favorite team, the New England Patriots. And the Texans won 41-21. We had CJ Stroud complete 20 passes out of 31 attempts, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a interception. Davis Mills also attempted a pass. Joe Mixon, 13 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Damian Pierce with 8 carries, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Dare Ungumbale had 2 carries for 8 yards. CJ Stroud had 3 carries for 7 yards. And Cam Akers carried the ball twice but got -1 yard. Stephon Diggs had 6 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown. Tank Dell had 7 receptions, 57 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Mixon had 2 receptions, 30 yards, and a touchdown. Dalton Schultz had 4 receptions for 27 yards. Damian Pierce had 1 reception for 1 yard. And for the Patriots side of things, Drake May's starting debut for the Patriots in the regular season. 20 completions, 33 attempts, 243 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Drake May also had 5 carries for 38 yards. Antonio Gibson had 13 carries for 19 yards. Terrell Jennings had 5 carries for 13 yards. And JaMychal Hasty had 3 carries for 12 yards. Demario Douglas had 6 receptions, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Kayshon Boutte had 3 receptions, 59 yards, and a touchdown. Hunter Henry had 3 receptions, 41 yards, and a touchdown. Antonio Gibson had 3 receptions for 24 yards. Kendrick Bourne had 2 receptions for 9 yards. JaMychal Hasty had 1 reception for 9 yards. Austin Hooper had 1 reception for 5 yards. And Jalen Polk had 1 reception for 4 yards. Then we had the Browns and the Eagles, with the Eagles win at 20-16. We had Deshaun Watson, 16 completions out of 23 attempts for 168 yards. Pierre Strong Jr. had 8 carries for 43 yards. Donta Foreman had 10 carries for 31 yards. Deshaun Watson had 4 carries for 17 yards. Jerome Ford had 2 carries for 14 yards. And my phone's being a little weird. And Cedric Tillman had 1 carry but got -5 yards. We had Amari Cooper with 4 receptions for 42 yards. Pierre Strong Jr. with 2 receptions for 35 yards. Jerry Jeudy with 1 reception for 35 yards. David Njoku with 5 receptions for 31 yards. Donta Foreman with 2 receptions for 16 yards. We had Jalen Darden with 1 reception for 6 yards. And Elijah Moore with 1 reception for 3 yards. And for the Eagles side of things, we had Jalen Hurts, 16 completions out of 25 attempts, 264 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Saquon Barkley had 18 carries for 47 yards. Jalen Hurts had 14 carries for 33 yards. Kenneth Gainwell had 3 carries for 23 yards. And Jahan Dotson had 1 carry for 13 yards. Then we had A.J. Brown, 6 receptions, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Grant Calcaterra, I should say, 4 receptions, 67 yards. We had Devonta Smith with 3 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. We had Jahan Dotson with 1 reception for 10 yards. Saquon Barkley with 2 receptions for 7 yards. Then we had the Chargers and the Broncos, with the Chargers winning it 23-16. We had Justin Herbert with 21 completions out of 34 attempts, 237 yards and a touchdown. J.K. Dobbins had 25 carries, 96 yards and a touchdown. We also had Darius Davis with 2 carries for 14 yards. We had Kamani Vidal with 4 carries, 11 yards. Hassan Haskins had 2 carries for 5 yards. Justin Herbert had 4 carries for 2 yards. And Quentin Johnston. I was correct the first time. 1 carry but had nothing out of it. Simi Fehoko had 2 receptions, 44 yards. Lab McConkey had 4 receptions. Did I say 4 receptions for Fehoko? I meant 2 receptions. Lab McConkey had 4 receptions for 43 yards. Kamani Vidal had 2 receptions, 40 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Joshua Palmer with 2 receptions, 38 yards. Will Dissly had 4 receptions, 26 yards. Quentin Johnston had 3 receptions, 22 yards. Stone Smart had 1 reception for 10 yards. We also had Darius Davis with 1 reception for 8 yards, and J.K. Dobbins with 2 receptions for 6 yards. Sorry about the cut. I had to go see what my cat was doing because he was meowing. But anyway, Bo Nix, 19 completions out of 33 attempts, 216 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Bo Nix also had 6 carries for 61 yards. We also had Devante Williams with 6 carries for 23 yards. Audric Estime with 2 carries for 13 yards. We had Jaleel McLaughlin with 3 carries, 8 yards, and Troy Franklin with 1 carry for 5 yards. We had Devon Vele with 4 receptions, 78 yards. Cortland Sutton with 4 receptions, 53 yards, and a touchdown. We had Troy Franklin with 2 receptions, 31 yards, and a touchdown. Jaleel McLaughlin with 2 receptions for 17 yards. Javonte Williams with 3 receptions, 13 yards. Lucas Kroll with 2 receptions for 11 yards. We had Lil Jordan Humphrey with 1 reception for 8 yards. And Nate Adkins with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Steelers and the Raiders, with the Steelers winning it 32-13. Justin Fields, 14 completions out of 24 attempts for 145 yards. Najee Harris with 14 carries, 106 yards, and a touchdown. Justin Fields, 11 carries, 59 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Jonathan Ward with 3 carries for 13 yards. Jalen Warren with 6 carries for 7 yards. And Aaron Shampglin with 1 carry but got -2 yards. George Pickens, 3 receptions, 53 yards. We had Calvin Austin with 2 receptions for 36 yards. We had Najee Harris with 2 receptions for 16 yards, as well as Pat Freiermuth. We also had Jalen Warren with 3 receptions, 11 yards. Darnell Washington had 1 reception for 9 yards. And Connor Hayward had 1 reception for 4 yards. And for the Raiders side of things, we had Aiden O'Connell, 27 completions out of 40 attempts, 227 yards, a touchdown, and 8 interception. Alexander Madison had 14 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown. Amir Abdullah had 4 carries, 24 yards. And Dylan Lobb had 1 carry but got nothing out of it. Brock Bowers, 9 receptions, 71 yards. Oops. Moved my camera again. DJ Turner, 2 receptions for 37 yards. Alexander Madison with 5 receptions for 32 yards. Alex Bachman with 3 receptions, 31 yards. We had Harrison Bryant with 3 receptions for 24 yards. Kristen Wilkerson with 2 receptions, 18 yards, and a touchdown. Amir Abdullah with 3 receptions for 14 yards. Then we had the Falcons and the Panthers, with the Falcons winning at 38-20. We had Kirk Cousins, 19 completions out of 30 attempts, 225 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Algier had 18 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Bijan Robinson had 15 carries, 95 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Ray McLeod had 1 carry for 3 yards. And Kirk Cousins had 4 carries but got -5 yards from it. Drake London had 6 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Pitts had 3 receptions for 70 yards. Darnell Mooney had 3 receptions for 38 yards. Ray McLeod had 3 receptions for 30 yards. Bijan Robinson had 3 receptions for 10 yards. And Tyler Algier had 1 reception for 3 yards. And for the Panthers side of things, we had Andy Dalton with 26 completions out of 38 attempts, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Chuba Hubbard with 18 carries, 92 yards. Andy Dalton with 3 carries, 21 yards. And Miles Sanders with 3 carries for 1 yard. And we had Deontay Johnson with 6 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Jatavion Sanders with 5 receptions, 49 yards. Jalen Coker with 3 receptions, 30 yards. Xavier Leggett with 3 receptions, 23 yards, and a touchdown. David Moore with 2 receptions, 17 yards. Miles Sanders with 1 reception, 12 yards. Chuba Hubbard with 5 receptions, 11 yards. And Jonathan Mingo with 1 reception for 1 yard. Then we had the Lions and the Cowboys, with the Lions smoking them 47-9. We had Jared Goff, 18 completions out of 25 attempts, 315 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We also had Hendon Hooker with 1 completion out of 2 attempts for 19 yards. David Montgomery, 12 carries, 80 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 12 carries for 63 yards. We had Craig Reynolds with 6 carries for 21 yards. We had Jameson Williams with 1 carry for 11 yards. Jared Goff had 3 carries for 5 yards. We had Sion Vaki with 1 carry for 5 yards. And Hendon Hooker carried the ball once but got -1 yard. We had Jameson Williams with 3 receptions, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Khalif Raymond with 4 receptions for 73 yards. We had Tim Patrick with 3 receptions, 68 yards. Sam Laporta with 1 reception for 52 yards and a touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown with 4 receptions for 37 yards and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs with 3 receptions for 28 yards. David Montgomery had a reception but got nothing from it. Then we had the Cowboys. Dak Prescott, 17 completions out of 33 attempts, 178 yards, and 2 interceptions. We also had Cooper Rush with 8 completed passes out of 11 attempts, 46 yards, and 8 interception. We had Rico Dowdle with 5 carries for 25 yards, Ezekiel Elliott with 8 carries for 17 yards. We had Devante Turpin with 1 carry for 6 yards, CeeDee Lamb with 1 carry for 2 yards, as well as Cooper Rush, and Dak Prescott had 1 carry for 1 yard. CeeDee Lamb had 7 receptions for 89 yards. Jalen Tolbert had 4 receptions for 43 yards. Rico Dowdle had 5 receptions for 30 yards. Devante Turpin had 4 receptions for 24 yards. Jalen Brooks had 1 reception for 15 yards. Ryan Flournoy, I don't even know. Let me know in the comments. 1 reception, 12 yards. And Jake Ferguson with 3 receptions for 11 yards. Then we had the Sunday night game with the Bengals and the Giants, with the Bengals winning at 17-7. Joe Burrow had 19 completions out of 28 attempts for 208 yards. Joe Burrow also had 4 carries, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Chase Brown had 10 carries, 53 yards, and a touchdown. And Zach Moss had 6 carries for 13 yards. T. Higgins had 7 receptions for 77 yards. Jamar Chase had 5 receptions for 72 yards. Andre Losibus had 2 receptions for 36 yards. Chase Brown had 2 receptions for 11 yards. Eric All Jr. had 2 receptions for 10 yards. And Zach Moss had 1 reception for 2 yards. And for the Giants side of things, we had Daniel Jones, 22 completed passes out of 41 attempts, 205 yards, and 8 interception. Daniel Jones also had 11 carries for 56 yards. Tyrone Tracy Jr. with 17 carries, 50 yards, and a touchdown. And Eric Gray with 3 carries for 13 yards. Darius Slayton with 6 receptions, 57 yards, as well as Tyrone Tracy Jr. Wan'Dale Robinson had 5 receptions for 50 yards. We had Theo Johnson with 3 receptions for 30 yards. We had Jalen Hyatt with 1 reception for 6 yards, and Isaiah Hodgins with 1 reception for 5 yards. And then there was Monday Night Football with the Bills and the Jets. With the Bills win at 23-20, Josh Allen had 19 completed passes out of 25 attempts for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns. We had Ray Davis with 20 carries, 97 yards. We had Ty Johnson with 4 carries, 34 yards. And Josh Allen had 9 carries, 18 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Ray Davis with 3 receptions, 55 yards. Dalton Kincaid with 6 receptions, 51 yards. Curtis Samuel with 3 receptions, 44 yards. Keon Coleman with 3 receptions, 26 yards. Khalil Shakir with 2 receptions for 19 yards. Dawson Knox with 1 reception, 12 yards. And Mac Hollins with 1 reception, 8 yards, and a touchdown. Also, Dawson Knox had a touchdown too. I forgot to mention that. Then for the Jets, we had Aaron Rodgers, 23 completions out of 35 attempts for 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 8 interception. We had Breece Hall with 18 carries, 113 yards, and Braylon Allen with 3 carries for 8 yards. We had Alan Lazard with 6 receptions, 114 yards, and a touchdown. We had Garrett Wilson with 8 receptions, 107 yards, and a touchdown. We had Breece Hall with 5 receptions, 56 yards. Tyler Conklin with 2 receptions, 10 yards. And finally, Jeremy Ruckert with 2 receptions for 7 yards. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, comment, do really whatever you want to do. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video. See you around.